First tonight, Braverman's out, Cameron's back in, and Cleverly's moved from Foreign to Home Secretary. These were the headlines from Rishi's big reshuffle after the PM faced pressure to sack Suella following that unauthorised article about the Met Police and those controversial comments about homelessness being a lifestyle choice. Braverman released a brief statement this morning saying, "It's been the greatest privilege of my life to serve as Home Secretary. I'll have more to say in due course." I bet she will. Well, David Cameron, who's been appointed Foreign Secretary, said he gladly accepted the offer from Rishi Sunak despite disagreeing with him and some of his decisions in the past. And while he's aware it's not usual for former Prime Minister to come back in this way, he says he believes in public service. Just last month, he accused Sunak of failing to act in Britain's long-term interest by scrapping the northern leg of HS2. As he's no longer an MP, he's been elevated to the House of Lords to do the new role. And meanwhile, James Cleverly, taking over the role of Home Secretary, said, "I'm absolutely committed to stopping the boats and making sure everybody in the UK feels safe and secure." Well, other important comings and goings include Therese Coffey resigning as Environment Secretary, with Steve Barclay moving into that role, and Cabinet newcomer Victoria Atkins replacing him as Health Secretary. Obviously, the blockbuster news this morning was David Cameron. The sight of David Cameron in Downing Street, coming back after 7 years in the wilderness, was extraordinary. And lots of people today saying, is that a good appointment? Is that a bad appointment? Will that be good for the country? Will it be good for Rishi Sunak's chances of re-election at the next election? Putting all of that to one side and looking at it just from David Cameron's perspective, I can completely understand it. I think, from his point of view, being invited to come back and slightly make amends for the mess of Brexit. At the moment, his political obituary is Brexit, 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 and a massive failure from his point of view because he was on the Remain side. This allows him to say, I'm bigger than that. I've come back to help out in Rishi's hour of need, and slightly rewrite his own political story. He was bored. He was sitting in his shepherd's hut. He had very little to do. It gets him into the House of Lords without a controversy of being on somebody's list. He does 1 year swanning around in private jets, being Foreign Secretary, and then he can go back to a nice, quiet life.
And also, we've learned that there is such a thing as a barony or a barony. How do you pronounce that?
He's a baron.
Word? Yeah, I know, but the word is actually to be a... like when people started meddling in the
It's
the
a lot of
Olympics.
barony, I can tell you
It's a
that.
lot of barony. And
Whatever
I
it
agree
His ennoblement.
I agree with you that it's probably because... Well, he agreed, didn't he? He's actually said that he was bored shoeless when he was sitting in his shepherd hut, and he said he was going to do it. But, I mean, doesn't it have shades of Mandelson? Do you remember when Mandelson went back in and he was there for a year and essentially all he did was write his diary and then get a book out? Yeah. And don't you think that with David Cameron, it has all the feeling of went back in, took the dog, wrote my book.
No, I disagree, because with Mandelson, the public didn't really like him. With Cameron, I think the wider public do respect him. He was a natural successor to Tony Blair. I think him going back...
I meant about actually going in just so that he could, be Foreign Secretary, write the book and then go...
David Cameron is not going to come in and now Rishi's going to win the next election. It's not going to happen. The Tories are definitely out. But he may save the Tories a few more seats, because there are plenty of people in this country, including the Red Wall voters, who like Cameron, and we look back at him and we hark at a time when we were stable as a country. No cost of living crisis. We didn't have our leaders being divisive. It was a safe time in our recent history. So I think it's a good appointment for him.
But he is the arch Brexiteer, isn't he? I mean, he's the man that launched...
The arch Remainer.
The arch Remainer, I apologise.
Exactly,
He's the man that launched the Brexit... the Brexit debate was launched
because he couldn't actually control his backbenchers.
But what I'm not understanding about any of this, so like Suella Braverman and co, who were in Rishi's cabinet, even if you disagreed with them, you could see what Sunak was doing. He was trying to play to that sort of gallery there, and
keep everybody in the tent
over there. Now with this, I've looked at this all day and I've been interviewing some of the characters involved. I cannot work out philosophically what this is meant to be achieving. So what you've got is kind of a Cameron, Hunt, Rishi Sunak type, very sort of establishment-y. For even the Laura Trotts, who have been brought in, who's my local MP, she's now got a gig in that respect. So these are people that have knocked around politics all their life. They've either been spads or advisors. It's got the old kind of Blairy feel or Cameron-y feel in that respect, but I'm not sure that's the kind of thing that's going to enamour voters to say, this is the party for me.
You're not going to enamour voters anyway, but I think the strategy is we're back in business, which is very strange because that's really... Sunak already looks really weak. There's constant shuffling. I mean, you couldn't run a pub the way we run our governments. The fact that you can have cabinet ministers in cabinet for weeks at a time or even months, it's completely disrespectful to the country. I don't think this is going to achieve anything positive. And at the end of the day, you have to question what Rishi Sunak thinks this is going to achieve in the long term. Why no one wants David Cameron back? It's like the throwback nobody asked for. It's like if someone said, "Oh, Westlife is coming back." Okay, it's like I'm going to see like 5 dad bods and vocals a bit messed up. You know,
be all right with a bit of Westlife.
No, it's like, you know, the Spice Girls are coming back. I don't want to see the Spice. I don't want to see the Spice Girls in like bum shorts in their 40s. It doesn't have the same appeal. This is the same thing.
I do feel really sorry for the poor old NHS. Yet another health secretary.
I know.
You say, oh,
what about housing? Their housing since 2010 is on its 17th housing minister. Just before I update you with a few more machinations, just going back to your point there about whether this is to appeal to red wall or blue wall, it seems to me that this is definitely Rishi Sunak giving up on the red wall and thinking what we need to do is that they are a busted flush. We've lost a lot of those seats. But we mustn't lose all the blue wall seats where we're fighting the Lib Dems. And I think, you know, bringing in the old Remainer, bringing in, you know, somebody who's much more establishment figure, they're thinking might appeal to some of those more Middle England-y, perhaps, you know, wavering Tory voters who would go to the Lib Dems rather than the red wall. But let me just tell you about a few other moves that have happened. Esther McVey has been appointed Minister without portfolio in the Cabinet Office. They were saying earlier that she was sort of some anti-woke minister, which I'm afraid just makes me yawn, but we'll see whether how interesting that will be. Paul Scully has been sacked from all ministerial roles. He was tech and digital. Now, we know that that's an area, and London, that's an area that Rishi Sunak really cares about, so that's interesting. And Andrea Jenkins has submitted a vote of no confidence to the 1922 in Rishi Sunak. Now, that is obviously the Braverman side of the party. We knew they were going to be pretty peed off about
But
Braverman
that is
being
where the
sacked.
story goes. To me, the biggest headline of this isn't really David Cameron. Nobody really talks about the Foreign Secretary when they go out for a drink. You talk about the Home Secretary, maybe Health Secretary. Foreign Secretary doesn't come up across the radar very often socially, and I doubt whether it plays on the doorstep that much as well. But the biggest headline is that we now have 2 Conservative parties. We've got the one run by Rishi Sunak and the one that's going to be run from the backbenches by Suella Braverman.
Yeah.
I am uneasy.
That's the danger.
I am uneasy having a Foreign Secretary who has, in recent times, been paid by the Chinese, by the Saudis. We've got the Green Seal. He's a man whose loyalty...
He's got good contacts.
He's got great contacts. And don't forget, he was one of the leaders telling NATO to go in and get rid of Gaddafi. We get rid of Gaddafi, power vacuum, Cameron legs it, and then now we've got this immigration problem.
I don't think, I mean, his record is relevant, but I don't think he'll have that much influence in this cabinet. I think the bigger issue, I think what Rishi should be more scared of is Suella Braverman and her, sort of the people that are going to support her. She's not going to go away quietly.
Already, right?
Exactly. She said, I'll have more to say in due course. She's going to come out with, you know, a diss track, a book. She's going to eat kangaroo testicles on TV. I mean, she's a huge problem. But the thing is, we could have seen this. We could have foreseen this. When Rishi Sunak resigned from Boris Johnson's cabinet, he said the main reason was because Boris's antics were distracting from the government's program, and we knew that's what Suella Braverman was going to do if she came into the cabinet. Even in her leadership in the leadership race, she was not a quiet candidate. She did make incendiary statements. This was her personality. She was the person that, you know, played to the hard right of the party. Why make her Home Secretary and then sack her?
I think it's interesting that we were all led to believe that loads of ministers would follow her if Rishi Sunak sacked her. That hasn't happened. Yes, we've had resignations, but they haven't been Braverman-led resignations. And I think that we tend to look back at leadership election and think she did well, the Conservative leadership election. She didn't do that well. So I'm wondering whether she has inflated her own popularity, as politicians always do, and whether it's interesting that perhaps that element, that she's not going to be led by many, or not many people are going to follow her out. I think also all the fuss today about Cameron being in the House of Lords has been slightly overdone. I don't think that it's that much of a problem for Foreign Secretary to be in the House of Lords rather than in the House of Commons. Yes, he's not going to be able to come to the dispatch box in the House of Commons, but the role of the Foreign Secretary is very often more on the airwaves and in the air, flying around trying to do diplomacy rather than being in the House of Commons. And he'll have a number two who will answer those questions. And actually, the House of Lords is much better equipped, quite often,
more robust
talking about foreign affairs. They have more experts in foreign affairs in the Lords
which will be
than they
Andrew
do in the
Mitchell, I
Commons.
think, who's going to be the senior minister in the Home Office, in the Foreign Office.
In the Foreign Office.
So,
But what does this
Who's
say?
a safe pair?
What does it say about our current crop of politicians? That on the
they're
Labour
rubbish.
side, you've got essentially Tony Blair putting the strings of Starmer, giving him the advice, and then now the Tories have got Cameron.
The poor man's Tony Blair.
Yeah, exactly. They're now the big.
Well, I
figures
suppose
again.
it was, it was ever thus, for goodness sake. The old timers would always give advice and steer somebody if they thought that they, particularly if they were as successful as Tony Blair. Of course they
I
could.
don't
I think,
This is more than advice.
Politics over the last 10 years has really been a revolt against that establishment. That was what the Brexit vote was about. That was what, Boris winning that massive majority was about. I don't actually think the kind of events that have led to where we are now in politics has been driven by people that want to see the establishment back. And I think that's what Rishi Sunak is not understanding.
but what does it say about Rishi Sunak or the Conservative Party that how many Tory MPs are there?
350.
350. Out of 350, he couldn't find one of them.
Not one
to
good one.
be the foreign.
Well,
so we had to
50
go
are
and
not standing
look
at the
for
next
a former
election.
Prime Minister who we all thought was living with a goat in Kathmandu or doing something sort of Zen-like with his life in his caravan or whatever the heck it is. And had to bring Cameron back into the fold.
Yeah.
But-
It's an extraordinary statement.
Particularly for Home
But
Secretary.
he's going to get many, many more headlines bringing Cameron back
True.
than if he had, moved
Yeah,
someone
but
else.
Daisy, he's now got to mooch around the world. This is the man that agitated to remain, and he's now got to walk around the world extolling the virtues of Brexit. What a great idea, and how fantastic it is. Look at us, we're a great, strong country now, we're out of the EU.
What do you think is the reason that he got rid of? Sunak fired Braverman now. Is it just the article, or my theory is that because she got all these boot boys to go down and defend the cenotaph, they get down there, and I was down there watching it the whole week on Saturday. They get to cenotaph. You couldn't get near it. The police have done a great job installing all the bars.
Yeah.
They then started kicking off and fighting. I went to the protest. There was horrible anti-Semitic words being said there, but it was a peaceful protest. They were not agitating for
I
a
think
scrap.
he got rid of her for insubordination.
So you think it's down to the article?
So I think it's the article. I think it was the homelessness comments.
I was going to
think
say
it
the
was all of
homelessness
those things.
comment being a sort of life,
And I
for those
think-
saying it's living in tents is a lifestyle choice.
And I think it was one of those things where he thought he was better off having, people in the tent aiming out, and then thought, actually, she is causing him so many problems.
She is a distraction.
And I think he's taken a gamble
Well, she was
that
clearly
she's not as
agitating.
popular as she thinks she
Yeah,
is.
quite possibly, but she was clearly agitating. I mean, this is worked out brilliant for Suella Braverman, by the way.
Yes,
This is
it has.
exactly what she wanted. Job done. She got the headline. She now becomes the darling of the right. Fast forward to the next election, Rishi Sunak walks that well-trodden path to oblivion, and she pops up, sticks her name in the hat and says, "I'm here, boys."
Yeah, and
What's a message?
That's
Not literally.
That's absolutely right. But also, it's quite interesting that he's given.
that would horrify me.
He's given James Cleverly this other, great office of state. We should point out that the 4 offices of state are now all being represented by public school educated Oxbridge graduate men. So that's one side
What else
effect
is
of today. Well,
was
that's the first
different.
time that's happened since Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. So actually, that is new.
That's not that long ago.
Well, yeah, but it's-
We're not
it's-
talking. We're not talking like the war. I mean,
but it's-
the
some people
government
would
has
say
always
it's a
been kind
backward
of
step.
elite. Well, our politics has always been an elite institution. That's, it's par for the course.